So, welcome back. Thank you, Stephen J. Hoping you're good. And Linda Jen, extremely appreciate these consistent bits of support very much. And I'm sure everybody who repeatedly watches this does too. Don't forget with all you guys to please do subscribe more and more to this. That is one of those ways you can actually get some advertisement, I guess, into the coffers. And then, of course, your usual commenting is appreciated, and liking, sharing, et cetera, et cetera. Let's get straight into it as usual. From Rob B. I think, Rob, I think this is on the older side, and I apologize. I just put it aside to use, and I forgot to keep it put in the list. So we're gonna listen to Rob discuss various points that relate to painting in the way you're seeing the title suggesting it right now. So let's just go for it. I greatly enjoyed your last video on silhouettes. In the last portion, you talked about Benson's etchings and the aesthetic distribution of values. I've read that Benson, especially in his paintings and drawings of birds, would go out, observe, and essentially draw from memory the scene. Here you seem to suggest that he's adapting these scenes to best suit his interest by manipulating where the strongest contrast is and how large each spot is allowed to get. Degas the same. And he's talking about images. I'm showing you paintings, not etchings, but they're all the same class valuistically. And the point I'm making is he was out there with in these fields or swamps, in the case of New England. What do they call these kinds of areas out here? The wetlands. But in any case, probably hunting. And so when you're out there, the birds are doing all kinds of stuff. When a shot goes off, the birds go flying. Or if they fly in, somebody's shooting, and who knows what kind of chaos ensues. But you know that when you're out there, you can't keep track of all the birds. So what are you going to do? So he's undoubtedly trying to get a sense of that flight. And in numbers of these things, he really does produce a feeling of movement. It's fairly striking. That is in the upper frame of this one. And yet there's also this aesthetic what did I do? Benson with two S's. I apologize. Let's see where I am. And yes, the distribution of values. There are the overall lightness of the thing getting darker toward the bottom. Then there's the middle tones and the darks. The dark middle tones, like the clouds, of one value, yeah. And then the spots on the land, the grasses, and then finally the birds forming the darkest darks, and making their own individual sets. So yeah, in this case here, all a person is doing is managing his the data as best he can. The birds. If you have any memory training at all, you can blink on a bird and hold the idea of that bird's shape well in your mind after a little training. So it wouldn't be at all surprising. And I know that commentary is there are books on him that will tell you what he did. And here's another one that I hadn't seen till recently. Another Benson. Once in a while, he puts in a figure. The figure he puts in has a cartoony element to it, and I don't know what to say except I don't find it satisfying. But perhaps when he was out there, that's the way people look. The guys with their heavy coats on or whatever, waterproof gear, guns did look funny. Nevertheless, you know, the guy can stand this way in the blind or in the bushes wherever he is. Or he can stand that way. There's so many ways a person could be posing out there, making his observations and all that sort of stuff. But these paintings have an element of the imaginative in it. You know, he may or may not be having guys stand out there and pose for him. My guess is he probably isn't. And certainly the bird's formation is not going to be posed, and clouds move by the skies. They're not going to be posed. So everything is in motion. It's very selective. He has, you know, it's fair game. Gamble called the movable feast. You know, that whole thing is in the Boston School discussion. Keep remembering, by the way, what I'm talking about here is Boston School Impressionism. But there are elements, and this is where Rob is going to go, there are elements of the imaginative. That is to say, there's a bunch of stuff you can do. Usually you're busy there watching the kinds of things that happen. Once you become a student of values and spots and spotting and all that sort of stuff, you'll notice things that you're not going to be noticing until you become students of the beauty of the spots, the interplay of spots, both in the different varieties of values, et cetera, et cetera. But this is just another variation on exactly the same thing, and so is the next one. I see I managed to get the spelling better. But you can see this is a basically light to dark picture, a light to darker light picture, I mean to say, has an element of midtones casting through it as one set of data, and then these blacker darks. And it's being aesthetically controlled as well as being managed for the purpose of expressing the bird flight in the way that he wants to express his experience, whatever that is. Yeah. Then the color relations and all that sort of stuff. They're undoubtedly impressionistically true. Some of these might have been borrowed from other pictures painted from life, but when you piece a picture together like this, you can say it's an imaginative treatment, right? So let's get further into what Rob is saying, though. This made me think of the architectural drawings I've seen and read about in Arthur Guptill's sketching and rendering in pencil. I've often felt unsure about his suggestion to manipulate the scene in front of you, or even from imagination when producing an architectural drawing, and it seems this conflicts with the idea of being true to nature. Yeah, and that's the core of this thing. What is this about true to nature? With the imaginative stuff, there's a need to be plausibly true to nature. When you're painting a portrait, you need to be a little bit more than plausibly true. To be a good likeness of that person is what they're hiring you for. So, and there's an element of that in the impressionist. If he's actually out there saying, "Look at this amazing scene," and I want to bring home what makes this so magical. I want to deliver that to the viewer. It really has a kind of almost a journalistic content to it, except that it's a journalistic content based on the magic you perceive. So it's undoubtedly on some level affected by your grasp of it in another way than just sort of what it is. It's that what it's doing emotionally and all that sort of stuff. You're trying to bring all that stuff home, but it's all in the pure data, if you want to put it that way. And in some sense or other, it's like a portrait, though, that you're simply making a likeness of the scene with the hope of really making it so like that a person could actually see the beauty you're bringing, that you saw, experience in their own eyes on the canvas, something close or proximal to the pleasure that you got out of it. And that's the impressionist mindset significantly. But he's talking about architectural renderings. This is a Frank Lloyd Wright one. If you haven't seen his stuff, have some fun. But architectural renderings are done with the purpose of either possibly selling the building idea. So you can see they're taken from shots like this one way down below a waterfall, or it probably is where this is sitting. I don't know if that's that Colorado one or which one is it. But you can see that they're creating a sense of grandeur, by getting way below and have this dramatic perspective built into it. And it's just routine. This isn't a discussion, though, about, we as representational painters have all kinds of purposes. Representational painting. Actually, Paxton's comment, you hang up your sign and it says painter, it means you can do whatever is required. Well, required by whom? So it could be an illustrator for a book, or it could be a rendering to sell a concept of a building. And and boy, beyond that, other kinds of pure illustration, in the sense of telling a story or trying to suggest an emotion, as we'll see in a second. But so the rendering, though, is often got a certain, imaginative blast to it. A little bit like the Hudson River School paintings, where they're repeatedly trying to produce this sense of grandeur, right, by the manipulation of you know, in all these cases, had they found a scene that had grandeur in it and they just isolated that element of it, or had they found sort of the tricks, I think, that produced that sense? You remember that comment by the Chinese, I think it's a Chinese aphorism that, or maybe, yeah, I think it is, maybe Japanese, but for in that kind of painting, they say that the mountain should be the size, you know, fill the canvas, but and then a tree should be such and such a size in relation to it, and a man should be the size of a peanut. Well, that's almost a formula for getting grandeur, for getting a sense of the grandeur of a mountain, and creating a relationship with a man. That is so commonly done in the Hudson River School stuff, and it's done in different ways. So, yeah, that's a manipulation. Uh, the impressionist mindset is different. On the other hand, I've found scenes, I should have used one here, where there is a really remarkable sense of grandeur in the moment itself. I was painting an autumn scene that you've seen online before so it's all full of, it's late sun just picking off bits of color across a sort of a hillside that has a mountain behind it. And but there's a certain element that's obviously there. And part of what attracted me was that sense of grandeur. So it was a combination in that case of trying to get the imaginative, the impressionist life of the light and the magic of the color, the big color relations, and actually design it. You know, actually have the design be empower up a big an expression of well, just to say grandeur. You know, of you know, leave it at that. That being said, I buy the idea that in nature all sorts of light effects occur at different times, so a plausible scene can be depicted in a great variety of conditions, dark foreground and light background, or vice versa, dark buildings and light sky, etc. And this attitude certainly has produced some of my favorite drawings from the likes of Otto Eggers and Samuel Chamberlain. There's also the world of people like Otto Wagner that I've already, no, I didn't show you. I'm going to show you that next, who produced staggering renderings of his buildings that don't seem to appeal to nature at all, but which hugely depend on the idea of the silhouette, in my opinion. Well, we're back to the silhouette discussion, but I'm not really primarily using this to discuss silhouette, but let's just have a look at his work. So there's the Otto Wagner, and you can see that use of the grand silhouette, sort of there's a pusher back. This guy is, I thank you for bringing him to my attention. I can't tell you I've particularly looked at Otto Wagner before. I enjoy his stuff. I didn't much like the other two guys you mentioned, by the way, or can't say I liked him at all, but Otto Wagner is a Canaletto type painter. Very, very reminds me significantly of Canaletto. This, I take it, is this stuff here is Rome, or I think it's Rome. Maybe it's in Greece, but that thing suggests Rome to me. So, but the the buildings, the fallen down buildings and present day architecture and all that sort of stuff, and then the scale of the humans in relation to stuff is pretty fascinating. But yeah, but that's the use of silhouettes in this way. Was this a scene? Did he stand there and was it like that, or did he actually move this over a little bit so it would make a better abstraction, so it would set off better in relation to the buildings, shall we say? Well, you know, there's the imaginative element in virtually all painting, and I would say, in a sense, but Impressionism. Having said what we just said about Benson, obviously the Benson has an imaginative element in it. Those pictures are not primarily trying to describe the beauty of a moment, the color value, light effect stuff of a moment, as much as they are to create the beauty of spotting and to play the compositional ideas related to the value spots. And so don't confuse those two. But he does use what we call it an impressionist palette on some level, you know, or precisely, probably. I mean, not being out there. But a lot of stuff, Lorraine's work and others are really, even though the landscapes are like more purely imaginative. And I think most picture making historically has been up until you get to the Impressionist era. There's very little work that's simply the shot of that spot. Let's just go to the next one. This is where you're talking about being able to manipulate. Now, this is For example, and lots of George Ennis's work is like this. He painted on the spot, and then he brought it in the studio and just did whatever until he had a picture he liked. He seemed to have motives that were to suggest some element of something spiritual, the way he talks about Swedenborgianism, some mystical qualities or something like that. But any given moment you could have you could have a sunny day and a spot of that's blocked by clouds, like this suggests. This suggests, and and certain parts of the background like this, and that is definitely something. You can get two things out of it. You can get that feeling of life and movement of shadows or whatever that is. Plus, you can get improved composition, your distribution of your dark units. The clouds are notorious. Obviously, clouds just move all over the place. So you can decide where you want your big light in relation to the clouds, and then have a discussion with yourself about how that's going to play out, shall we say. But so he went out there, probably this is basically what he saw, but he may have just decided this was boring here and decided to stuff a tree in there. That's not a thing that isn't done. I said, you could look at Metcalf's in the same way. I'm not using his work here, but you can sit them and just simply wonder about whether somebody adjusts something a little bit. You certainly have no problem with doing it if you're out there. The basic thing is true, but why not, if this tree just would give you a better play here, why not use it? I'm not that guy who will tell you not to do it. I am the guy who will tell you, though, and when you're a student, don't go out there with the idea of changing nature. Go find a spot where when you frame it with your viewfinder, you'd say, wow, that's a nice composition. And then really just bring it. And maybe later, maybe in the studio, you'll notice something about it where the composition could use a little help. But it won't be something that will destroy the unity of your big impression if you're an impressionist living on that color light model, sort of the Monet model. And here he's doing it again. It's just sort of suddenly found a little bit of light in a cloudy day. He's finding spots that suggest a little bit of sunlight trying to get through. And how much of that's arbitrary? Well, it's got to be completely, in some sense, arbitrary because he's standing out there and the thing is going to be moving and moving fast. He's not just simply painting it. But picture makers will notice where silhouettes occur. How this is, again, back to your Leonardo. Make sure you read your. But how the cows are featured against the lighter ground. They're featured better here, and less so if they're against a darker area, and all those sorts of things. And those begin to be the places of interest, etc. And then making sure that this is again the case in the case of the cows. It's just a movable feast. Just decide where the biggest one's going to be, or the main grouping of them is going to be based on your compositional perspectives, perceptions, or inclinations, and then decide on where the lesser or whatever. And there's a distribution. If you can manage those as in terms of their majors, I want to suggest that to you. Once they're out there, you do have that problem of having to decide where they're going to be and why. And if you can just figure out where your main one is going to be and why, then you can get to the second strongest one and then weaker ones, or however, I'm just pointing at these randomly, but you can go ahead and continue doing that. Now, these are spots of dark, but they're also cows. And so you have to think about it both ways. And that's in the spotting game, the silhouette game. It's, what are the silhouettes doing and how interesting are they? And the other one is, of course, what are the cows doing and how interesting is that as a in storytelling or whatever other way that objects tend to be useful to us. My interest is essentially twofold. One, when painting plein air from life, are you of the opinion that all efforts should be made to make the scene exactly as it appears in front of you, no matter what? Or do you feel it's worth it to manipulate values to suit your compositional and decorative purposes? Well, you can see what I'm saying already. That should be quite clear to you. What you go out there for, if you're an impressionist, is in a sense ready-made. If your job is to find a spot, but you could say this is essentially good. There's probably something over that tree over there may be a problem, but it takes a while in laying it in even to begin to grasp sometimes your compositional framework. The main line of the composition. If you can sit there and figure that out early, you'll know what parts are probably going to be problematical. And sometimes with little pencil scribbles, you can sort that out, the mainline information and that sort of thing, and so on. But yeah, it's worth it to manipulate values. But now let's talk about the compositional versus decorative purpose. Those are the two things we're talking about. I just mentioned it with the cows being cows. There's a compositional element in that, and the decorative purpose, the distribution of darks. But it's not a manipulation that is, it fundamentally defines this. It's simply, I find that it's best if you just simply are saying, and it would play better in one of those categories. So I think you're hearing me when I say this would be decoratively better if I had moved that just slightly. It'd be, what we're really saying is in the blurred eye sense of things, just spotting and values and all that sort of stuff. Say the major 3 or 4 value spots are say 2 of them are exactly the same and it's noticeable and isn't comfortable. Then you want to figure out whether you should have framed it slightly differently or what, right? And that's real. That's something I'm going to tell you not to do. Your first job is to go out there and paint from life and to come back in the studio, as I said, and look at it and see what, in fact, is problematical and get yourself really good at managing the truth in front of you. And you'll be very pleasantly surprised how much that begins to educate you about where the beauties lie in things. And then, if you keep coming in with the same idea, like are S curves, is that your idea of composition? You're going to be missing a lot of stuff. That a lot of possibilities may not be yours. All right, but let's talk about decorative anyway for fun. When we say decorative, we do mean decorating plates, decorating. This is from Pompeii, I think, and you can see at least if this is a true coloristically picture coloristically, it's very pleasing in color, and that's a decorative thing. That's the thing you're trying to do. It isn't always there for you in a landscape in this simple, obvious way. This is a limited color thing, like a lot of Degas, and therefore easier to control. But other aspects of decoration that we talk about are the silhouette, just the engaging patterning here. This is I've always admired the better ones of these kinds of Greek vases. I think, where is this one from? Toledo, I think this one's from. But I just love the way they use just little bits of silhouettes lost all the rest of the way through, and it indicates so much about the story. They really are good at using silhouette to say everything, and they're not relying on noodling and modeling and all sorts of stuff. It's everything virtually is in the contour, and then but you're also seeing, by the way, so there's a story element to that even, right? So the decorative, it's always this balance between this is essentially decorative, but there's this other element, or it's essentially this other element, which I mean to say it's essentially representative or storytelling, and yet there's a decorative. So all painting has an aesthetic need, shall we call it that? And so this composition is a very pleasing composition. 2-value system. This is a 2-color system too. This is just all blue, but it's all just values. This is a couple different colors, or it's black and one color, whatever, but featured. What I was going to say though is once you get into the patterning thing, you have there's the storytelling element, and they're doing it really effectively. And then there's the spots and how fascinatingly different each of these spots is, and how totally engaging and I'd say brilliant. It really is a nice way to describe what the Greeks are doing here in these in the what I call now simply the patterning in the sense of silhouetting. Okay, it's just magical as can be. So, but these are just 3 examples of things that start out essentially as decorative. They don't start out as like Innes's. They don't start out as, oh, here's a slice of nature. So let's keep going. So how can one synthesize the beauty of drawings such as those by Otto Wagner, also paintings for people like Klimt, who takes great liberties for decorative beauty, with that of more naturalistic approach? I often wonder if people like Zorn, Sargent, even Benson consciously edited what they saw in order to produce the most beautiful pattern on their canvas. That's exactly what you want to wonder in both cases, by the way. I'm going to show you some Klimt and that sort of thing in a second, but some Mucha Klimt. Yeah, but so that's what I'm telling you already is that there is essentially a synthesis anyway. It's already built in. Your pictures need to be pleasing. You know what I told you about the Amy Moore conversation when he says you make up your composition, do a nice composition, and then make sure you blur your eyes and see if it's you like what's happening. When it just becomes spots and just the patterns of those things, you want to engage both. One of them is what you may call pure aesthetics of the spots. And the other one is a composition based on like what we call furniture arrangement, how the objects sit in front of in relation to each other on their table. You know what I call the floor plan, and numbers of other things, even the main line and that sort of thing. And by the way, look those up. I've done videos on those subjects. So how can one synthesize the beauty of drawing such as those by Otto Wagner, Klimt, without a more naturalistic approach? You know, nature is the source, right? So when you say naturalistic approach, I don't know if I know precisely what you mean. Let's see if some of these pictures maybe bring that out. So I'm showing you Mucha and Klimt. So there's a naturalistic element to this figure here. That's realism, and then there's this pattern stuff built in. So there's a poster-like quality. It feels like it might have even been designed for a poster. Maybe his information comes out of the ideas related to posters, which are essentially flat with the idea of maybe possibly printing them like silkscreen printing, making a production of them that isn't photographic production, but is some other kind. As I said, silkscreen. These are all these flat patterns, all the flat patternings, all through this whole thing. Again, these are decorative, but they are remarkably truthful. You know, they're not trying to do anything decorative with the face. They're not trying to change it into something it isn't to make it more decorative. But you can see it's an excellent color scheme. That's a decorative thing. This is extremely pleasing in the distribution and ideas of spots and shapes and movements and all that sort of stuff. You know, even seeing the idea of the stuff that's in here happening out here, you know, as you're almost becoming magnifying it, etc. But yeah, this is a lot of what you see in Degas as well, where you see an idea here that sort of starts shifting into another one and then into another one, another, going from oranger to less so to being almost brilliantly lit. To whatever extent these are true, by the way, these are just aesthetic aspects of whatever shot we have here that are pleasing in themselves, whether etc. Whatever we can take from that. But so what naturalist, so all, are these elements things in nature? Are these patterns in here? Are they things you see in nature? And so the derivative, I mean, everything is derivative on some level or another. Sometimes, nature isn't the source directly. Sometimes some other thing you saw in somebody else's painting becomes the source for your whatever deviation you make in relation to that, art being the source of other art at times. I'm amused by the for some reason this Antigone popped up. I was thinking about Antigone because of it looks to me like he's set up some mannequins in a diorama, and he's painting an imaginative painting. And this is, and these are both examples of imaginative painting. Yeah, I mean, and yet this is a perfectly good, as it were, color scheme. There's a decorative element. Things are nicely distributed. Darks are, lights are. It's reasonable spotting. Gamel's is the same thing. It's an excellent color scheme, and but everything he's making in here is purely derivative. It's just stuff he's made up in his imagination. So you'd say, in one sense, does that mean it's decorative? Well, yeah, it is kind of a decoration. It's kind of just pleasing, a pleasing abstraction. But in either case, these are sourced in nature, right? And you have that element. Even the way he's drawn these abstractions here, that feels like a shoulder muscle, but then it also reminds you of an insect or something like that. So it has all sorts of derivative stuff that's coming from that's being introduced to suggest, etc. But this is like the Joker on a card, on a playing card. And Gamble has his ideas. What does that imply to you by way of storytelling and that sort of thing? I mean, the ways you can go, uh, uh, borrowing from nature and just doing stuff out of your imagination, or taking a slice of nature and then turning it into something, right? Something that let it allow it to become something that's other in your imagination. But in any case, I'm just showing you that there's always this aesthetic necessity in work. You could say that this Munch is or Munch is an exception. This is what I call an illustration of a mental condition, or like a sense of fear or something like that trying to be portrayed. It's like a meme to me. It's like a cartoon. And having said that, I thought of Daumier, and here's Daumier has maybe painting himself, but he's making himself into a cartoon figure. So there's an element nature borrowed here, but he's expressing something out of his head. It's an exaggerated, in both cases here, the whole thing is exaggerated to produce some sort of a curious feeling about the person, or about the mental condition, mental state. But these are examples of stuff borrowed where we're not simply saying, but that's not true to nature. I won't tell you that this is particularly appealing to me as painting goes. It's not particularly satisfying in the abstract. I don't find much of his stuff is pictorially delightful, and yet some of it's effective in terms of that dream state or something like that, where things some things that sort of come into your mind are sort of irrational and all that sort of stuff. Is there a necessity for us to be aesthetically pleasing? You're going to have to figure out what the form is all about. But to the extent that it's patterning on the page, like music is playing, interrelationships of notes. The goal of music seems to be, on some level, to elevate the soul, etc. In large part. And I suggest that that's something that good composition does, et cetera, et cetera. There are ways in which, what is that? That's a big question, where we are, in terms of painting. Where are we? I'm not going to tell you anything about it. I can't tell you it pleases me much. You do wonder, though, whether or not you could express that state any better than this. Maybe that, your whole irrational state of mind is best expressed by sort of irrational, shapes. Or even irrational, like your oranges here that make three stripes, and then you have some up here that are totally unaesthetic. Is that the state of mind you're in? And is that in what way would that be elevating, or is that not even a necessity in our form? Something for us all to think about. I bring up this tarbell because the real larger question is when you're painting from life, how much do you deviate from it, and what's the point of all that sort of stuff? You're talking about somebody, and I don't show him here, let his head come into my name come into my head. El Greco, who's deforming. He's constantly deforming. He's got a certain plausible sense of nature, but his figures seem to be stretched, right? And by the way, there are people who see that way. People have argued that his eyes were bad or something like that, but I don't. It looks like his work was done from nature, and if his eyes were bad, if he was looking at nature side by side with it, it would have come out the same way. It would have looked correct, if he had drawn this image next to him to do the same thing as nature was doing. It seems to me he would have wound up with a correct figure. So he was doing it for probably expressive purposes. I can't say I find much satisfaction in that, distorting figures, and you don't see much in the history of painting. Those kinds of pictures don't seem to survive well. But in any case, what's happening out here is these trees, branches are sitting here. Is he mindlessly copying exactly the way they look? Possibly. I'm just looking at these three units here of dark green. Possibly. And the question, would he make adjustments to them if he didn't like the way they were playing to each other, if he didn't like the sizes they were to each other? I can't say, frankly, I like this blotch of solid mass right here. I can't say I find that decoratively fun. On the other hand, it does get us through this one and up to this one. So you can see a rationale for it. That word rationale, there's a logic involved in this, and then it's an interrelational logic, but it's more like the logic in a sense of music. I always wonder about what Beethoven is doing when he's become deaf. Obviously, there's a mathematical or some other thing where he's got a huge imagination to be able to still hear the music in his mind's ears. But our game out here, so that to whatever extent you recognize it when you're out there and painting it, you see these sets of pinks, you see this set of pinks, and you start seeing the wholeness of the sets, and you will be a judging of it to see whether or not it's pleasing. And if you can look further and see if there's more to it that would be more pleasing, you might say, there's something about this one that's exactly like this one, and it would be more pleasing. By the way, and that could be one thing, and therefore it could be very pleasing in itself. But it could be that this one has a size to this one, to that one, or has three different types of uses of shapes in relation to the pinks. This is the sort of things you're sorting through constantly in your mind when you're, as Benson says, when you're composing all the way through the painting. So there might be some selection. And by the way, the time of the day will be shifting. And if the sun is hitting all these things at one time of day and this one in a different way, and yet the sun comes down and you see what this one does, maybe this one stays mostly the same, but this one all of a sudden becomes smaller. You say, oh, that's better. Yeah, you might paint it to that changed moment. It's no question you might. You don't have to feel trapped in the photographic, let me put it that way, okay? And you shouldn't be, because photographs aren't by any definition aesthetic per se. Oh, I should have stuck my brother's photograph on here. He took me a photograph of the dusk on his ranch where the four horses were lined up, and they're lined up at the mountains, lined up in relation to. It's really quite a very impressive little composition. I can tell you about it. I should have shown it. I'll show it one day. My brother doesn't. I don't think he watches these, but if he does, thank you for that, Tim. But you can see that that's true of everything we put down. The color notes, purples to purples, playing to each other. The darker green spots, and however they relate, even to things that imply the same thing, they're seen as systems. The blacker blacks and whatever they play, this is all stuff that we're saying, what is it doing? What is it doing? And you're always in the mode of trimming or editing slightly. It doesn't mean you have to do much, and you frankly shouldn't do it until you see a reason. Don't turn this into the painting you did last week. Do you see why I might say that? Every time out there, you have to find its logic and its unity, its rationale, so to speak, what makes it a nice picture. What makes this one nice. One thing I'm getting a big kick out of as I watch it with you guys is this wonderful blue all through here, picking up again up here. That's a wonderful distribution thing. And the pinks just in the ground of this blue, the pinks playing through here and down here, just the whole set of the variety of these kinds of things, and yet they're hanging together in this wonderful unity. It's funny, these are soft-edged pinks, these are hard-edged pinks. Is that a thing? Is that a discussion point? Is that part of what makes it sort of fascinating? Et cetera, et cetera. I don't know what that thing is in the ground here. I might consider thinking about what the heck to do with that. I wonder if that's a stick or something in the ground. But that straight line there doesn't seem to be in keeping with anything, particularly in this picture. And I don't know anything about this picture. It could be a bad reproduction or something. But that's something I'm interested in, what we might, there you are as an example, what we might do with that. Yeah. Was that all we have? I think that, no, we have this one Zorn thing. So the question of what you could put in and what you take out, is there going to be stuff like that? I might come back to these pictures. I hope it don't take too much longer. I might come back to some of these, but this is a self-portrait of Zorn, as usual, limited palette, and in some senses limited excitement because of it. He doesn't always use the limited range. With a limited palette, you can get a lot more range. This is fairly simplistic. But, so you're doing a portrait of yourself. You wouldn't put yourself there and start painting it if you didn't already see something special about the spotting. You must like something about what this light is doing to the other lights as you pose there, looking into your mirror. You must already see there's a compositional concept here. As you get more and more trained, you get to understand how composition works. And I am talking about the decorative side of composition. But all of it, like posing a figure the way Leonardo talks about it, to make it agreeable, to not make the hands do the same thing exactly, and everything about if the body's turning this way, should the head be turned that way, or the tilting of the head versus the body, this lining up straight with all these sorts of things that create the variety that makes it interesting. But then all the way back to the color scheme and the distribution of notes, and this has that, in one sense, at least in this reproduction, it has a sense of being relatively a boring sense of oranges. Maybe not so much, but you have a little hint of something here, then you have all this and this here. So there is that set, but it doesn't seem to distribute. I'm thinking it probably does, or it picks up in different places out here. That the reds do. The greens also don't seem to be doing much anywhere else. That seems to be in the class of a green. So is that something you might edit? Might you make a certain passage of this? Might you be wondering about that? And if you saw something over here that actually was off a little bit and could have been a little bit greener, might you do it just for that reason, for an aesthetic reason, or for a compositional, in the purely decorative sense reason? But yeah, bet that if something out there was, by the time he looked at it, or as he was looking at it one day as it was getting closer to being finished, he would see something that was just like poorly lined up. Yeah, I could see exactly that he would adjust something, but no different from what you would do if you were painting a model, a woman, say, with hair. You'd say you'd be doing this hair. You just do it the way it looked one day, basically pretty okay, but knowing that what you weren't really happy with it, and then you saw the next day she came in, you'd see this beautiful wave that would give you at the beginning of a plan, beginning of an idea of how to design. That's the gamma word for that. How to design the hair, or etc. But that'd be a local design thing. And of course, everything you're doing with relation to the hair would be talking about what it's doing to all the rest of the painting as well. So that's, nevertheless, but that's the sort of thing that might shift. So that's why it's called the movable feast. And you might get a little bit of that movable feast. You alluded to, or you said something about it. Outdoors, the lights are changing, and I've already discussed how that might affect something in your picture. And you'd say, oh, I think I'm improved by adjusting that. But you're not going to lose the unity of the impression visual. The thing to remember is painting, it can do a lot of stuff. As I said, Paxton's thing, hang up your sign that says painter. It means, you can, if your primary mission is illustration, do it good, right? And with everything we make marks, though, we make color marks and all sorts of stuff. When you have a set of color marks, they're either pleasing or not so pleasing, and you have to know what you're up to. You have to have some element of the decorative has to be in your box of tools, right? So, and of the illustrative, of the storytelling element, and all those sorts of things. So just try to be the best, most well-rounded player you can be. That's probably the most important thing you can be thinking about when you're going through all these things. I'm going to go back to your first statement, though, your first question, because there was something in it that I think I overlooked. Okay, I greatly enjoyed the distribution. So I've read the Benson, especially in his paintings, drawings of birds, observe, essentially draw from memory the scene, manipulating. All right, so this is all the stuff we're talking about here, isn't it? And then this made me think of the architectural renderings. We've talked about that. There's a lot of words here, so I'm reviewing them again. When producing an yeah. So the architectural drawing, by the way, this reminds me of a picture I did a whole bunch of imaginative stuff, just scribbles for it, much in that line with what Jerome was saying. When you're young, you'll have these ideas for pictures. That is not going to stay there forever. So jot them down, put down these ideas. I had one based on the inspiration of the return of the Ark of the Covenant to the city of Jerusalem, or at least to Israel. Was it Jerusalem? Yeah, I think it was, because they were coming into the gates of Jerusalem, and I thought, well, you can do all this work with the figures standing up there, like the Cimabue procession, with the Madonna painting, or you can make the whole field of the architecture dramatize the importance of the moment. So I actually consulted with an architect and asked him how I could figure out how to get the building to be right. The two pillars, so to speak, they weren't pillars, they're actually two different buildings on either side of the gate that should be coming in. And I was able to figure out where to stand to make them do what you're essentially seeing this building do. Create this tremendous grandeur, this great, amazing sensation of, the importance, shall we say it that way, the monumental importance of bringing the presence of God back to Jerusalem, which is what it symbolized, embodied. And so it, that isn't question of manipulating. It's something you see. It's actually getting yourself in the right position until you actually can see that and say, yeah, this will do. And yet that does set you up to have to do certain other things with the figures and where they're going to stand and all that sort of stuff. You have to see if all these things will work together. I like the way Jerome does that with so many buildings. He's extremely good at it. So then this one I think is the one I was trying to get to. So all sorts of light effects occur at different times. We've talked about that, and all with Innes. There's also the work. Yeah, I don't know that I can add to this. I think I've covered your territory pretty good. And I just encourage all you who are new to this thing to kind of make a list of all the possible versions of painting that there are, and don't be that exclusionary person. I like this all. I like our whole world. I like what happens when you carve a pattern on the handle of the bone handle of a Norse knife, or what you do in architecture, or what you do whenever you're making a Greek plate, or some other arts and crafts furniture. But painting, I'm talking about painting in a piece of furniture. Every version of decorative, I didn't go into mural painting, but obviously there's this element of the plausible that has to do with when you use natural figures, and are we going to accept them out here? You have to deal with the size of time. When you do this kind of stuff, you have to make sure that the people aren't going to just turn away from what you're doing because of some defect in your presentation. And really poorly managed figures, they won't withstand. I mean, depending how far away things are, of course, they won't withstand just by being nice decoratively. But unless they're exotically nice decoratively, and then they will stand a lot, But that really puts a ton of pressure on you. But to be the complete painter, there's so many. As soon as you put a figure out there, you have figure-related content. I apologize for the beeping today. I shouldn't have the phone in my pocket. At least it hasn't rung yet. I better not say that. Murphy's Law will kick in. Uh, so, yeah, I think I've covered the territory. So I think I'm going to get out of there, Rob B. And thank you very much for the question. Feel free, anybody, to follow up. But that's what I wanted to end with, though, is just this idea of let's allow painting to be painting. Let it be all the things it can be. Don't get confused because I talk about what the Boston School is doing to mean that that's the be-all and end-all of the purpose of painting. I will tell you that there's something that's going on in the Boston School that contains a grasp of the importance of the painting becoming a piece of, as a form, becoming a piece of what I'm going to call music, having an element of what music does in each piece. I think there's a thread here that you can't escape from. And what is that? Do you see what I mean? And yet, in whatever you bring into it, though, there's this other thing that is constantly involved in it as well, none of which are to be lightly dismissed. Let's leave it at that. All right. Thank you again, Stephen J. And I wish you well. And Linda Jen. And we'll see you in the next one. I do have to have discussion with Mr. Producer. We will try to create some sort of a video. I mean, a live one again. So hopefully not too far off. We are still talking about trying to do a workshop in London in the spring. Hopefully that can work out. I actually got my passport updated, so I could even go. Maybe I haven't received maybe it won't come. All right. So you all take care. Have a great week painting, and be well.